Linda?
Hello, Colton. I'm excited to meet you. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Absolutely. My name is Colton Schara. I'm the general manager and sommelier for Cadre Restaurant here in Madison, Wisconsin. Evan and I have been working closely together since the beginning of Cadre. I think I started in July of 2019. We opened in October of 2019. And then, as Evan mentioned, 4 months later, we were shut down with COVID. That was a very challenging time for us. I've been working in the food industry for, I think it's 17 years this summer, and I'm 33 years old now. So it's over 50% of my life, which is crazy to think about. But I wouldn't want to be doing anything else. I was a student at UW-Madison. I studied geography, like Noah Bladorn, who you've had on the podcast as well. And all through college, I worked in restaurants, and then afterwards as well. The thing that always gravitated toward for me was food. To me, is a microcosm for everything. It's culture, it's politics, it's sociology, it's art, it's place. And especially a restaurant format is really important to me as a geographer. So there's a concept called the third space. So where do you go when you're not at work and you're not at home? And historically, that was always places like town squares or maybe community centers or churches. And I think for a lot of us anymore, it's really restaurants. Like that's where we go. Like it's where we socialize. It's where we go as a family. Sometimes we go by ourselves just to have a place to think and to get sustenance, to feel connected to people again. Mm-hmm. And COVID was really hard because all of a sudden there was a collapse of those third places. There wasn't anywhere to go. And all of a sudden, instead of having work and home and places to go, it was just one. And so I think a lot of us really suffered during that time. And me especially, like I work in front of house. So like I meet dozens of new people every day. And all of a sudden I had to find a way of connecting with them virtually in sort of imaginary communities. And so this recipe came out of doing our takeout tour, which I sort of found working through a book by Joel Robuchon called French Regional Food, where he really doesn't focus on recipes so much. And it's really more about like the culture, the history, and all of those things that I kind of mentioned before about where food comes out of. And what we noticed was, when we had to transition from dine-in regular service to limited seating we tried to do a prefix format where we could have as the minimal amount of people as possible. It just didn't work. We just couldn't get enough people in the door. And so we knew we had to do takeout. So we tried to transition, and it was like, our food just isn't working. I mean, we love things that are beautifully plated. Evan does such a good job having these composed dishes. And we needed to find something that could work to get put into a box and get picked up by people safely as well. Mm-hmm. And what we noticed was that if we tried to run the same menu, you'd maybe get an order once every 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 9 weeks. And that's just not working, for what was happening at the time. And so what I figured out was we could do a narrative, which was find all these different regions in France, different places, and really tell their story. So I don't know if Evan mentioned it, but we didn't just do the recipes, which changed every week, along with beverage pairings from those places. But I also wrote like a little newsletter as well. And like in 2 pages in prose, tried to tell the story of that place and where that food came from and the people involved, and like really just give like this overhead perspective view. And that's where we had guests order from us 25 weeks in a row. And they said that every Sunday it became picking up the takeout meal, going home, and not just having dinner, but also reading a story and figuring out where this food came from and what inspired it. And for us, it was really informing because, I mean, as a restaurant, you're focused on the business, the day-to-day aspects. It's get people in the door, make good food, turn over those tables, more people in the door, just over and over. And so we never really got the time, even in those first couple months, to really reflect on the food that we wanted to serve. Who is Cadre? What are we trying to accomplish? And so the takeout tour was a really good opportunity for us to focus on that and to really explore an aspect of food that we otherwise wouldn't have gotten to with the time. And also we connected with our guests in a completely different way. Like we had people reaching out and emailing us and saying that it became so much of an aspect of their lives.
So how have you carried that on now? So if you became a big part of some people's lives, how did you carry it on now that COVID sort of is in our rearview mirror, we hope.
Yeah, we hope so. I mean, yeah, that's a big part of what we're focusing on. I think, unfortunately, we as a restaurant and as a hospitality industry, we all kind of like very herky-jerky got started again, where it was like, okay, yes, you can open up and our customers feel safe now. For a while there, I mean, even our front of house employees didn't feel safe. They said, hey, like all of a sudden guests decided that today is the day that I'm going to come in a mask and I'm ready to dine out again. And trying to start that back up was really hard. Especially, I mean, you know, like Evan works in a back of house world with cooks, and a lot of them got to keep working through COVID. Front of house employees, a lot of them left the industry. Like I feel like I'm a survivor. Like I don't have a lot of peers that were able to stick around in the industry. And so getting back started up again, we've definitely had to hit the ground running. And for the last 2 years, like work through like how to get back into the groove of service again. And only now, maybe in the last like few months, where we've really started focusing again on, okay, like what is our mission? Like, let's revisit that. How do we tell the story? One thing I think, you know, Noah and I have talked a little bit about is we were looking at potentially did a Kickstarter to do a TV show, like an online web series. And what we would really love to do is tell the story now, instead of France, of Wisconsin. Because I mean, every day, you know, we're a farm to table restaurant. We have these amazing farmers come in. I mean, salt of the earth, like people who come in that you have no idea, you know, this one was an Olympic skier. This one has an Ivy League education. This person runs a historic renovation business and works on amazing buildings in Wisconsin. All these people, they do that and farm on top of it. And they've had these amazing lives. So we need to figure out how to tell their story, because they're not going to do it for themselves. They're busy enough. And also they're humble people. Like they're not going to go and say like, I'm starting a TV show, I'm going to write a blog, do all of that. So as a restaurant, you can't just be a restaurant anymore. It's becoming more than that. Like some people are starting hot sauce companies, whatever. But for us, like we're trying to figure out how to tell that story better, not just in the restaurant, but in other formats as well. And that's why writing for the Shallot was a really great opportunity for us.
You know, I love the idea of sort of a restaurant and geography and thinking about really, you know, I don't know that I've ever thought of a restaurant that way, thinking about it as the town square or the place or, you know, that I think is just something that if you did expand it and tell the whole story around, I think that could be really informative to people.
Restaurants are egalitarian spaces. It's where you can go in, and what I love about it is that sometimes people don't know who each other are. Like you're sitting next to the chancellor from the university, right next to a surgeon, right next to a local artist, you know, like there's all these different people interacting in the space. And what we love is like when you have regulars, especially, like you start introducing people, like you play a host. And to me, that's where community starts, really, like at that level, is having a space where you can host people and it's comfortable, it's safe. There's no social strata. There's no trying to impress this person or that person. I mean, so often where we're located, we're close to the university. You know, we get these people that chair of a department, head of a research institute. And sometimes we even get a grad student come in and they're like, see them and like, oh my God, like that's whomever. And I'm like, oh, you should go talk to him. They're like, they're great. Like, I know him. He comes in every week. He gets a bottle of Malbec. I love that guy. And they're like, oh no, I would never. It's like, no, you should. Like, this is the space to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think coming out of COVID, especially now, like, you know, a lot of us are trying to remember how to be social again. And like, what are the rules? And it's time to redefine it. Like, we do need to figure out like ways of connecting people. And I think a lot of it will be physical, but we also need to figure out ways of doing it digitally as well.
Well, and, you know, food, art, all of these things are very healing. Mm-hmm. And if we look at it that way, maybe kind of tell me how you got, okay, so you're in school, but you end up in the food industry. What was the trigger that made you say, this is my place. This is my home.
I'm gonna blame Wisconsin for that, for the Go Big Read program. So when I was a freshman at UW in 2009, that was the first year that they did the Go Big Read, where they had a book that everyone had to read. And I think they did a really good job of impressing on professors, like, you need to incorporate this in your class, no matter what your class was. And that book for me was Michael Pollan's In Defense of Food. which, Michael Pollan's a great author. He's done a lot of different things now. He's a food journalist, but specifically that book where he is exploring like, we need to get in touch with our culture as Americans and how to eat. And he looks at it from many different facets, like what we're told politically, the food pyramid, like what is part of what we eat, and culture, advertising, science, all of that. And so I started to realize right away, and I had professors reinforcing that in all kinds of different classes and fields, how important food was. And for me, I kind of grew up splitting my time between Madison and Reedsburg and Sauk County, and Madison's pretty cosmopolitan, and Reedsburg and Sauk County is like definitely more rural and farming focused. And so I was always like, I want to get away from that. Like I want to get away from farms and cows and everything. But then I realized I was like, no, like this is so fundamental to our daily lives. And it's so important for the state as well.
How can you use, cadre in a restaurant and this experience to bring people back to that more direct feeling?
I think, Evan and I will both tell you, it's like we love Madison because people are very connected to like the farmer's market and that direct face-to-face where you're cutting out the middleman of the grocery store. Like, where is your food coming from? Like, oh, sorry. I think there's good grocers in Madison. We're lucky here too. I think people in Madison especially are very connected to where their food comes from. It's something they think about. I wish people would think the same way about their wine, but I'll get to that at another day. But especially during COVID, when restaurants were shut down and, some of us, like, I'm busy. Like when I'm outside of work, like I don't necessarily always want to go home and cook. But during COVID, I had to figure it out again, and a lot of us, I think, went home and it's like, I'm going to try to figure out how to make sourdough. I'm going to try to figure out, how to do my own pickling. I'm going to take on a new challenging cooking project. And people had to do it as a family again. And I have seen that. I think part of the reason why we're not seeing as many people return to restaurants, something that Evan mentioned, we're not seeing pre-COVID attendance and sales in restaurants. But I think the good part of it is that more people are committed to cooking at home. And so, sharing recipes and getting people thinking about where their food comes from and how it's made is really important. I think that'll be like a good way for us to connect with our guests in the long term. And that kind of goes back to that point that I made that like, that you can't just be a restaurant anymore. Evan has so much knowledge when it comes to how to handle a particular ingredient. He's already thinking months ahead. Like, nope, like strawberries are not in season yet, but when they are here, this is what we're doing with them. We're going to pickle them. We're going to turn them into sauce. We're going to preserve them, this and that. And I think there's a very good chance that consumers will start thinking that way soon too. Like it's almost that time.
Well, you had the time. I during COVID started making my own vinegar.
Yeah.
And it was a really long process. And of course, before that, you just, didn't have the time or maybe just weren't thinking about it. Right. So I've continued to make my own vinegar. But one of the reasons I did that is because I can know, and you're a sommelier, so I have to ask you about this, is I can no longer have red wine, which I always enjoyed because I get stuffy, from. And so how do you really learn? You said about Wisconsin or more regional wines, but the pairing process, how do you think about that? And as we think about this dinner coming up and you're going to pair, what's some of the thought process you go through?
I think when it comes to wine, the thing you can't really substitute is tasting. I'm lucky, and much to Evan and his fiance Kathy's chagrin, I taste often. I have people coming to me. Yesterday, I had a lovely winemaker visiting me from Italy, and I try to take advantage of those moments because these people have come a long way and they put a lot into their craft. I need to care about where it comes from and ask the right questions and taste consciously and do all of that. And I think that's the difference for me working in front of house is like Evan's very much like trying to do justice to this local produce and take care of it, make sure not to waste it, enjoy the seasons. For me, when it comes to wine, I don't have to be in such a hurry most of the time. But what I really do need to do is be a good steward. So the word sommelier means wine steward, or that's what it refers to. When you think about stewardship, it's about taking care of resources. And so that's something that I talk about and I get emotional about sometimes is when I look up on that wall, I see hundreds of glass bottles of little time capsules of captured genetic material, water, soil, sun, everything. But it came from a place and an immense amount of effort and time went into making it. So like, I really need to think about how it tastes. I need to think about how it pairs with food. I need to remember all that information. I need to communicate it to people in a language that they'll understand and really like get it in the right people's hands as well. And so this dinner coming up, and for this recipe, we wanted to focus on things that were regionally appropriate. So we suggested that you do a cider pairing. In this case, it was a Normandy cider. But there's also great local cider makers like the Cider Farm out in Middleton, John and Deidre, who are working with these native varieties of cider apples that have come from France and come from England, and they're trying to make it the right way. There's other ways of shopping more local, and I wish people would think about that when it comes to wine too, like huge carbon footprint to get something here. Mm-hmm. So for the dinner, I need to see the menu first. I haven't seen it yet. But once I see the menu, I'll think about what is a textbook pairing, like what will make sense. And then I'll probably focus on a couple producers like we did for the mosaic dinner. Unfortunately, I was out of town and I did not give Noah good notes. Mm-hmm. But one producer I want to give a shout out to, and that will probably feature for that dinner, is Las Mujeres out in Reedstown. Tony Basilisco is the winemaker, cider maker there. He grew up in Santa Barbara and then ran a great place down in Chicago called Cellar Door Provisions, which was like one of the first like restaurant/national wine bars down there. But now he's living out in Reedstown with his kids and his wife, and they have like some wild own rooted apple trees. And so they're foraging some of those to make great local ciders. And they also make wine and piquette as well.
Oh, so the other thing is, and I've learned this from talking to some of the other folks in the food service industry, there's obviously a substance abuse issue in the food service industry. And I know, especially in the mental health world, a lot of our folks really try to, stay sober. And as you think of an event like this, do you think about pairing something also that will be sober friendly?
Yes, I do. It's certainly a much bigger focus in the last couple of years. I think the part that I'm concerned about more broadly is just that this was the year that finally everyone decided that there's money to be made in things that are non-alcoholic or spirit-free for pairings. So, I mean, if you look at advertising, it's very much focused on NA beer and yada, yada, yada. It's hard for a restaurant to do on an everyday basis because a lot of times these things are not, they're perishable. Like if I'm doing like fresh juices as a pairing, or I'm doing like a mocktail pairing, there's not a lot of good ready-made products just yet. They're starting to come out in the last year or two. But the nice thing is for a dinner like this, we can do NA pairings because we're not focused on like repeating it like over and over again. So yes, we will have NA pairings for the dinner, and that is a focus. And yes, you're right to point out some of the issues with substance abuse in this industry. I've already lost some good friends to it, or at least seen people who've had their careers cut short in the industry because of substance abuse issues. I've dealt with it myself as well and had to drink more consciously and carefully. So like when I taste, I'm always tasting, spitting. And then in general, like what I try to focus on is drink less, drink better. So like be more conscious about how you consume, think about where it comes from, treat it more as a ritual than as something that is a necessity.
Mm-hmm. And I think, the speed of the industry when you're in the restaurant, I think, the intensity, and I can see where it sort of happens. And, a lot of people talked about sort of the end of shift cocktail and all of that. So
I think it's been interesting. I mean, the majority of our staff now at Cadre has been sober, or like mostly sober, since for the last like 3 years. It's very uncommon that we have a staff like ask for a shift drink at the end. A lot of our new hires, especially younger kids, like, a lot of people that we're hiring now are part of Gen Z, Gen Alpha. And a lot of them are like, nope, I just don't drink. And it's like, cool. Can you at least like talk about and like know some of the information when it comes to the pairings? Like, yeah, absolutely. All right, we're good to go. But yeah, I mean, like to give you an idea of like the stress and everything, like the pros portion of this recipe, I wrote that like before service. Like Evan told me at 1:00, he's like, hey, we're already 2 days past this deadline. Can you write something? And I had no idea what I was going to write. I just sat down at a computer in the office and probably from like 2 p.m. until 5 p.m. wrote that. And I've got people banging on the door. Can you come out? Can you come to the host stand? Can you come out and help? Can you answer this question? And I'm like, no, I got to focus. I got to do this. And so like what came out is more of like a vignette. It's not exactly poetry. It's not exactly like a story, like prose wise, but I mean, that's everything right there. Like, hey, like I've got emails, I've got vendors coming to like deal with a plumbing or electrical issue. I've got people who are trying to call me. I've got guests. And meanwhile, like we're trying to like look good, like we're trying to be ready for service, and we're trying to like put on our best face, and we're trying to make sure that people who come in are like comfortable and taken care of. And it's a toll. Like, I mean, writing that, like I wrote that and I just like, I got done and I started crying. Like Evan came in, and even when I read it now, I get emotional.
Oh, I know. It's lovely. It's absolutely lovely.
And our staff looked at it too. And it's like, we all resonated with that, where it's like, yeah, like everyone thinks that it's like kind of glamorous. Like, oh, you work in a restaurant, you must know a ton about wine. You must be so fun at dinner parties, this and that. And it's like, no, I mean, like most days, like I see enough people. I want to go home. I want to be in the quiet. I don't want to see people on weekends. And then also like, with the food aspect and this like sustenance, like most of the time, like, you can ask any chef, like microwave burritos, for me, it's quick trip sandwich on the way home, because it's the only thing that's open at midnight. Yeah, it's like, it's so much of that. And so like, I put that in there as like doing this recipe is therapy and whatnot. But I mean, for a lot of us, it hasn't even been achievable yet. Like we're not at that point where we've like taken care of our lives enough that we can have a nice meal and the fridge is stocked and we're getting enough exercise and taking care of ourselves in the right way. We have so much work to do. But thankfully, people like Evan, Dane County Food Collective, the Shallot is putting a voice to some of those issues and trying to give people resources and trying to give people outlets so that they can take better care of themselves and really be the complete people that they need to be.
Well, and I think you summed up the theme of this issue was if you only knew.
Yeah.
And I thought you summed it up so well of if you only knew. And I think that's really the truth. People don't know. And until I started talking to all of you in the food service industry, I did not know. I only knew my little from back the grocery business. I had no idea. And I feel like I've learned so much. So, well, I really, really appreciate that you're going to be a part of this dinner that's coming up. Thank you so much to both you and Evan for, participating and being part of the Shallot, but really for being willing to share how, both Dane County Food Collective, how, your work and about really the healing power of food. I think you were, I think you should share that night some of the discussion about sort of what you talked about today. I think it would be really great.
Hey, I mean, we're here to hold space, and Cadre will be open. So June 2nd, if you can make it to dinner, that would be great. Love to have you
there. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.